the power of storytelling, especially in recent days where, the realities about global economy is fast changing, and we have business leaders, we have political leaders. When they come around to share with us, ideas, and they need us to really, they need us to how do I explain this? They need our cooperation. And I've watched, the powerful speakers, the powerful public speakers. I've watched their series, and over time we realize that there is power of storytelling. When you share your story, even let me just put it straight, the simple one, when you share stories on social media, it gains publicity than just talking about than just using than just writing a content that has no story. So people tend to, maybe because of emotion, because of empathy that comes with storytelling, and we begin to see the power of in storytelling that are not in academics context. So can we, as teachers, how can we how can we integrate storytelling into our regular classes, that it becomes part of the learner, that it's easy for them to use storytelling as a tool wherever and whenever they are.
Thank you very much for your question. First, we have to identify the literacy level of the student. Can you hear me? Okay. First, we have to identify the literacy level of the students that are involved. And we have to use a concept called collaborative learning, in the sense that as we identify the literacy level as students, we would be able to collaborate with them in terms of they telling their own story. Now, technology has made it in such a way that there are multiple ways of learning, which is quite different from what our own parents were exposed to when they were growing up. There is multimediality in terms of using of technology, sound, and all that. And you have to understand that the 4 levels of literacy skill include listening, speaking, writing, and reading. So at each point, we have to gauge and see to what level, to what extent our students are conversant in the use of these literacy skills. Now, including storytelling as part of our narrative in teaching involves, one, a process of collaborative learning where sometimes you allow the student to tell their stories, either through recording for those who have access to modern technology. Now, each child's stories, the process of him or her telling the story, sometimes we debrief, is a process of debriefing that child from certain level of trauma, from certain level of abuse, from, certain inner structures that on a normal day, we would not be able to know. And these layers of structure sometimes enhance learning and sometimes prevent learning. So that the child in certain instances would more or less engage in the teaching. Every story has a moral lesson on underlying tone. So when the child engages in telling his or her story, within that structure of storytelling, either in written form or in recorded form, we'll be able to identify grammatical infelicities, we'll be able to identify weakness, we'll be able to identify a lot of things as teachers that would enable us to treat each child based on his or her own term in terms of our relating with this child. Now, literacy content in terms of storytelling in teaching a child does not altogether behove on the teacher, because the story which the teacher might include in passing literacy skills to these children may not be appealing to them. So you allow them to give samples of sort of, what kind of story do you like? How was your weekend? Or how has the lockdown been? the lockdown has been a means of propagating unique stories that are unique to individuals and all that. And these children have either using drawing, either recording it or writing it down. All these literacy skills boils down to our ability to identify their literacy level. Now, storytelling in terms of passing message across entrenches or emphasize the message we are about to pass, in the sense that it gives the student a mental picture of what we are trying to pass across to them. Now, in the age of technology, it will be a disadvantage for us to think that the concept of literacy is squared only in speaking and in writing. There are dimensions of literacy which technology bridges the gap. Now, if depending on where the school is located, if it is in the city where most students have access to technology, then technology should also, be involved in terms of passing literacy skills to our own children. In the sense that today, when we are talking about skills in relating with people, it's not only about writing, but it's about how we can manipulate these technological apps that technology kept giving birth to in passing informations and all that. We're somehow, somewhere interconnected by technology. And our stories, no matter how unique it is to us, has a link to persons and people all over the world. So it is necessary we start identifying within our class these unique stories and try to classify these stories and group them. When we're able to group them, our stories are part of us. Our stories defines us. Our stories defines our learning skills. Our stories, defines how fast we can imbibe what is being taught within classrooms. So when we're able to identify these varied stories within a motif or fix them within a plot, we'll be able to divide our classrooms and be able to adopt different forms of teaching to carry these students along. We have slow learners, we have fast learners and all that. Now, these characteristics of these learners are embedded in their personal stories, because where we come from, to a certain extent, define us. So understanding these definitions of the children we teach would enable us to be able to include storytelling content or storytelling as a means of educating our students. But it will be extraneous on the teachers. So the teacher would now decide to what extent am I willing to give my time regular 1 hour or 30 minutes given to a particular teacher to teach. So it's either the teacher, define a new method in terms of creating time to interact or creating time for these kids to, document their stories unaided. Because certain times I found out that some stories are written by persons, are written by the student parents and not the students. So the person you are examining is no longer the student, but you're examining a superior force, which more or less is the parent, in terms of, I'm trying to assist my children, but what the parent has done is that he has bridged the gap and has limited the student in terms of the student learning and improving. So for us now to bypass such interference, then we must define a new means within school to imbibe storytelling as a means of passing cognitive experience to students.
All right, thank you. You've loaded us with information, but very importantly, you said stories have uniqueness. That regardless of how unique your story is, there are people who share similar experiences, and
Yeah.
and Yeah, I can relate with that. In fact, sometimes when thinking of business ideas, my coach and I we had a discussion, was that 2 weeks ago, that someone brainstormed on a business idea, came up with a name. You know, he was just walking around and he mentioned the name. Few years after, a business of that same idea, another business using that same idea, that same name, was established, and it's all over. So, regardless of how unique our stories are, there are people who share similar experiences. And you mentioned something very powerful, that in trying to integrate storytelling in classes, we need to start from allowing the children to share their stories. When they start sharing their stories, fears, anxiety, and all of those negative emotions, they will get over those negative emotions, and they will be able to express themselves. And when they start doing that, that is when you can start correcting, molding them, correcting, till they become that young chap that we all are proud of. So in my notes, I have the children should start telling their stories, regardless of how little we think they are. They also have their stories. The stories may not be of pain, it may not have that emotion that we share as adults, but of course their stories are relevant because that is their reality. Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Kachi. Yeah, you are Mr. Yusuf Uthman Adekola. Thank you for joining in. I've tried to
Yeah,
send for you earlier. Thank you.
yeah,
Yes,
thanks.
you'll be taking the poetry part of this discussion. So over to you now. You are.
Okay,
I wanted to answer it in two ways. I wanted to answer two questions. One is,
okay.
what importance do you think is poetry? What importance do you think we need to bring out from poetry while integrating it in classroom? Is there any
Okay.
connection between literacy content and poetry? What is the importance, and how do you think we can integrate poetry in our regular literacy classrooms?
Okay. Thank you very much. Before I delve into the question, let me quickly say I'm sorry for just coming online. There was a problem on my side here. So that's it. Yeah. The importance of poetry in relation to literacy. Yeah, of course. Creative writing generally, it does what it does. It's an imaginative way of expressing our feelings and expressing the things that we have experienced. Okay, so moving down to poetry precisely now, it is one way through which many have defined as a way of expressing our emotions and feelings, and and particularly our experiences. Okay, so if this is brought into the issue of literacy, we are going to realize that it helps really. It helps a lot in literacy. And how does that? How does it help? You can't write. No one can write poetry or any form of creative writing at all without having to think or without having to think. You just have to think because even in imagination, thinking has to go side by side with it. And thinking is one of the important things we'll talk about literacy, and then the ability to understand things even beyond the informal situation. Usually the classroom setting is usually too formal. Usually, naturally, that's how it is. The classroom setting is a formal setting in most cases, where there has to be a way things have to be done and ways everyone must behave. But with creative writing, and specifically poetry, it gives a chance for students to explore some other avenues to do certain things. Okay, so for instance, now I remember a point in time where I had to take some students the art of poetry writing, and then I gave them um, something to do. I told them to just write something. I gave them piece of paper. I told them to get piece of papers and write something, anything that comes to their mind, that they could look at anything around them and write a poem. And then the thing was quite striking because some of the students, you would see some students looking at the fan in the hall, and then there was a particular student that did something that struck me. He looked at the fan in the hall, and then he wrote a poem about a kwashiorkor patient. Okay, talking about someone with a big head and thin body. You know, that has allowed the student to explore deeper than what he or she would have normally just done in just learned in class. You know, those are some things you don't expect little kids to, you may not expect little kids to think about, because that's something so deep. And you would realize that shows that the student understands whatever she must have learned in a science class. Okay, so now what we have there is that beyond the fact that he or she must have been taught nutritional um, things around nutrition in class, we see that with the way he has been, the person, I don't want, well, the girl, with the way she was able to bring that knowledge of how a kwashiorkor patient looks, bringing it into to describe a fan. You know, that's metaphor. Even while the girl may not know that it's metaphor, that's so deep, and that expresses the fact that the girl has been able to show us how well she understood whatever she must have been taught in class, in science class. So with that, we see that with creative writing, poetry and every other kind of creative writing, it helps to explore our inner knowledge beyond feelings. It's not just about feelings, even our deep knowledge, what we know, it helps to express them in ways that are unusual, ways that even we who write may not have thought we would ever be able to express ourselves. So we were able to explore certain things that we didn't know might have been within us. So, and with that, literacy itself is improved, and beyond, both creative and critical thinking go side by side. So, comprehension of whatever of literacy materials in fact become easier, because you want to look at it beyond what has been written. So you want to understand it deeply. So I hope I so thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Adekola. You know, you said something very critical. You mentioned the fact that integrating poetry in literacy lessons helps the children to think. It helps them build critical thinking skill, which is very important. You know, critical thinking is one skill that is very relevant in 21st century. Thank you for that. Let me quickly go to Mr. Mike. So, yes, what I remember during my theater in education course. That was, what year was that? Maybe towards our final year. Can you remember that theater in education? So something very important happened. The fact that beyond, you know, when we watch movies, we enjoy it and all of that. But there's something about movie or was it or filmmaking or all of that. It's collaboration. Collaboration is very important because regardless of either you like someone or you dislike the person or whatever, you all have got to work together. You all have got to work together on, if you know, on a movie project, on a film, and you have to just put whatever personal interests or personal dislikes you have, put them behind you, do what you have to do, give your best to the audience. And I remember then our lecturer then, that was Dr. Murray, said, when he gave us the project, he said, I'm sure you guys will fight over this, because beyond I know, and all of that is collaboration. This one will bring his idea, the other person will bring the idea. No, it has to be this, and you will fight. Just be prepared that you fight, and it happened. In fact, it happened on address Viaza. It was during address Viaza that, in fact, the entire hall scattered. But eventually we showed up the next day, we gave our best shot, and it was very fantastic. So now to you, creativity, collaboration, those skills that we can derive from having drama, short plays, in classrooms, role plays, even in topics such as social studies. We want to treat the topic of family, and you have children do role play of father, mother, someone is the grandfather when you may be teaching extended family. Share with us, how can we how can we integrate those short dramas, short plays, even the ones we have during end of session parties, such that children are very interested in developing their creativity and collaborating with each other, collaborating with people to get projects done.
Thank you. So, I agree with you. you know, uh, the advantage of courses like theater in education, one of the biggest advantages, it forces you to learn collaboration. Yeah, and it was one of the most important courses I did in school. And while I worked like 2 years as a school teacher after university, before moving to the entertainment industry. And in that time, one of the things I personally observed is that the educational system is quite obsolete, it's quite outdated. I mean, as it is, you know, it's the same pattern of how we learned that is being exactly recycled. And because, when I was in school, I was probably in secondary school, say some, I don't know, I think I was in GS1 in 1998 or something. That was a long time. So imagine 22 years later, whatever approach was used in learning when I was in school, still the same thing that is still being used. That is why I think storytelling storytelling is not a one approach in class. People believe it's limited to you want to be an actor, you want to be, you understand. But the essence of like theater in education then was not primarily to make people be
Please,
that was
Mr.
what
Man, let me mute all participants.
okay. All right. May I?
Please unmute now. Unmute yourself, Mr. Mike.
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. So theater in education then helped because it's something I think we should always consider. You know, short forms. Of course, it does not have to be so grand and big, but short forms of role play helps. Aside helping students, one of the most important thing it does is it helps students integrate. You have this sense of collaboration. You have this sense of, and for some people, trust me, there are some people that cannot engage in group study because they just don't work well as a team. They work better as individuals. So there are people, even when we're in school, there are individuals that will tell you group reading doesn't work for me. I'd rather just learn alone, which makes sense. Of course, it makes sense. But the truth is, you learn better if you are with a group of four because there will always be someone that knows something you don't. Do you understand? And one of the things we learn when we engage in things like theater and things like role play in school is we help people. Uh, work well as a team. So if I've done some exercises with these guys and I think, oh, we are very cool with each other now, it's very convenient when we say, okay, let us learn together. You understand? Another thing I think it is very useful for is, like I mentioned earlier, uh, most of the time, the classes we perform best are the classes we really enjoy, not that they are easy, because I don't believe any subject is easier than any subject. And that is why you see the best students in mathematics might struggle with government. And you see someone that is so good in government wondering that, guy, how are you so good in mathematics? Government is easy, but I don't know how you cope with maths. It's hard. So I really don't believe any subject is hard. I believe there are factors that influence performance of students in each subject. And that is why no student, well, in most cases, no student gets the highest grade in every course. And that is why I don't agree with people that someone is more intelligent than someone. I don't think intelligence could be measured. So one of the things that affects how students perform in subject is interest. And one of the ways to build interest is like like someone just mentioned now, the classroom system is a very formal system. Psychologically, it's easier for younger people to learn in a not so formal, situation. For most people, it's not a general thing, but for most people, I do know that. So it breaks down the strong formality to an extent when we are dealing with something as casual as, okay, so today's exercise we are going to have a 5 minutes play to explain something. It's also going to stay longer in people's head, because after that day, the children, the students are going to make fun of it. They're going to discuss it. They are going to make jest of themselves. You, that time that we were doing drama, that you were crying like a So by the time they need to recall something from that subject, that 5 minute act might help them might help them recall the whole lesson for that day. It works better for them than when the teacher just stands in front and reads out a note, and after that explains exactly what's on that note. It might stay in their head to pass the exam, but there is more to learning than passing exams. So things like that makes learning more. I think it facilitates learning. However, it's also important to know it could also easily distract. So it has to be well managed. Else, you could actually lose the whole objective. You might miss the objective, and it becomes a play avenue where we just come, laugh, have fun, and go home. You understand? So it's something quite delicate, and that is why it's not something anybody should just employ. That okay, they say storytelling, role play is good for learning. Okay, so when I get to class tomorrow, I'm going to ask my students to act something. I'm going to ask my students. It's something you have to else you are going to turn the classroom into a theater hall where you're just coming, everybody's just entertained and they go home with nothing. So have I answered your question to any extent?
Yes, you did. Thank you so much. And you've put a whole lot in one. Let me put it that way. You mentioned the fact that beyond collaboration, beyond creativity, it is the fact that role plays facilitate learning, and that when children, when they act, when they do things with their very own hands, when they do things with their very own body, they recollect better, than we relying on the teachers talking and then giving the children the task of just on cramming or memorizing lines from the teachers without actually allowing the child to do things in ourselves. That's very important. And it was, this activity was mentioned at the first panel session as well, when we are talking about children who have dyslexia. The fact that when children do things, regardless of either they can read well, either they can speak well or not, they remember, and it helps them learn better. It facilitates learning. Thank you so much, Mr. Adejonwo. You even mentioned interest, the fact that being in a formal setting, the child may lose interest. Being in a formal setting, the interest level may not be that high, but when there is something fun coming up and it's well managed, just as you say, it must be well managed, so it doesn't just go on and without the children learning. The teacher needs to define the objective of that short play, and the teacher needs to ensure that there are relevant materials if the children need to have some costumes around. And sometimes schools do have some costume because of this cultural day events schools have. So at the store you may just have costume attires for to someone to role play father, someone to do the role play of this and that. So it must be well managed such that the children learn while they laugh. Not just that they laugh, they play, and learning did not take place. So thank you, Mr. Adejonwo. Now I'll go back to Onyekachi.
I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't know I mute myself. So I said, I'm sure you've written books. How many books have you written now? You're laughing? Okay. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, let's hear you speak. Let's hear you speak, please.
Can you take your question again?
I said, I'm sure you've written books. During the years at our master's class, I remember you had 2 books already before you started the master's program. So now that it's been about 3 or 4 years we're done, how many books do you have for us?
Okay, well, before I came for master's, I already had 12 books. So far, I had, yes.
What have I been doing with myself?
No. So far, I have 21. I more or less write textbooks these days because academics is changing, and I'm looking at areas where we need to shift a bit in terms of the interface between literature and technology, in terms of monetizing creativity and all that. So based on that, my research is also shifting in recent times.
Wow. Oh my God. I need to start writing. Honestly, sometimes when I start like that, I just write, in parts, leave it and forget it, and all of that. So you're charging me to go back to my books on my laptop and start writing. Oh my God. Someone has written 21. Hey. Okay. What is the secret? Please share with us. What keeps you going? Writing, despite the fact that we all are in this same country with no electricity. We all are, we won't say no electricity anyway. Don't let me put capital no. With all of the challenges we have around, how are you able to write?
Well, basically, it's being focused. For me, I feel writing is what I owe to my generation. We need to sense it at present, and we also need to shape the future. For instance, I teach in the university, and I teach young ones, and the knowledge base when I went to school is quite different from the knowledge base at present. Literacy, we have multimedia learning. We have we have different way of learning that our parents were not used to when they were growing up. For instance, you cannot talk about literature at present without talking about technology. The concept of viewing literature as a print concept has moved. You understand? So we would know it would be short-changing students if we keep teaching literature and keep teaching knowledge as it were 10 years or 5 years ago. The knowledge base has moved. You understand? Even in branding, in communication and all that, the organization would want to know, how would you use Facebook? How would you use Twitter? And how would you use Instagram to sell their products? And how would you use these multimedia apps that they keep, producing, inventing different types of apps each day. So how do you use this to promote what you're selling, to promote your knowledge, to also hold government to account, and to also monitor government projects and establishments? So technology has given us power, but also actually restricted us in some ways. So for you to write, you should be able to manage your time. And you should also define your purpose. Most persons place material value on what they write. So you must have a motivation. It can be positive motivation, it can be negative motivation and all that. And you must be focused. It's more or less like it's a defined race. When I get to this junction, I must make a U-turn, which is a cycle. Definitely, if you defined your writing as a process that must be completed. But you have to understand too, that for me, I am not married. I don't have kids, I don't have wife, I don't have girlfriend. So the book more or less function in multiple capacities in my life. But for those who have families and who have responsibilities to take care of, they can as well manage their time. Like maybe I can decide to write for 2-3 hours every day. So if you multiply 3 hours times 366 days, at least you achieve a lot. So you just have to be conscious of your time, because technology empowers us, but also technology more or less disempowered us. For those who fail to manage their time. Most of us are on Instagram, we're on Twitter, we're on Facebook, and how do you manage those apps, those interconnectivity? So you have to decide where you should be functional. Should you be functional on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter? You should choose one to enable you to minimize your time. Or you use technological apps to set updating. There are apps that when you compose your message and set it, it can update on itself when the time comes. You understand? So that's basically it. And what helps my writing is that I have short span in terms of concentration. So I easily move. For instance, last year I was looking at digital literature, the interface of technology and literature. But at present, what I'm looking at how the African literature responds to pandemic. How has African netizens, how has writers in the digital space, how have they been able to respond to the lockdown, to government failures, etc., using literature? Now, if you were active on Facebook during the lockdown, you agree with me that there's a narrative that was trending. It's called still on the matter. It makes use of pictures and written words. So that form of narrative emphasizes how community evolve and how the community makes use of pictures and collective memories in telling a very short story to shift their focus from the pandemic. And you will agree with me that the same method of storytelling was adopted during the Biblionic era. The same method was adopted in telling certain narratives that were not close to the pandemic. You understand? So that's it. The world is changing. our teaching, our narrative should be should change according to time. However, the past must also be preserved, in the sense that there's how, in terms of writing these things and documenting it, you acknowledge the past. When I started lecturing in 2017, it was a big problem for most persons to accept that digital literature is a form of literature that humanities across. But with time, they started accepting. But even with the outbreak of the pandemic, you would agree with me that a lot is happening on the cyberspace, and we cannot continue to teach literature, we cannot continue to teach literacy content by excluding these multimedia forms in the 21st century. Even, thank you.
You have even introduced a more recent example. Thank you. You mentioned a whole lot. I asked you about what keeps you going, what keeps you writing. The first thing you said, focus. Focus. You mentioned time management, the fact that one needs to be very careful and manage the time effectively if one needs to achieve this. You mentioned defining purpose, that the more purpose should not be monetized. If there is if money is attached to it, one may not be able to push through, one may get disappointed, one may get withdrawn. You mentioned the fact that one must have intrinsic motivation, inner motivation from within yourself, have reasons why you want to keep going. You mentioned something very, very important now, which is where I'll ask you another question, is that social media, as you know, and other, like just as you mentioned, another technology inventions can be good and can be bad. In terms of distraction, it is easy. It is very easy for you to get distracted these days. Just have your data and your phone and your smartphone. Go on Twitter, you'll always have people talking about something. Go on Instagram, you'll have them talking about sharing pictures and videos. Go on Facebook, you'll have them talk about a whole, regardless of what is happening. Do if I during the week we had increase in fuel price, increase in electricity tariff, everything was still going on fine on social media, because I won't mention them now because of the events that was around them. People, the youth were not that concerned about those issues around national development. They were particular about those things entertaining them on the social media. So it distracts from purpose if one does not define the purpose of using social media very clearly. I remember, still on the matter, I have younger ones who were settling matters all around. Yes, thank you so much. And I'll still want to ask a question from you, Kachi. Now that we know it is, for me, let me be frank with you. I write better when I pick my phone. I write better. I mean, not better anyway. Let me say faster. I can type faster using my smartphone than sitting with my laptop, typing or picking my pen, writing in a book. And just as you're talking now, I'm thinking of exploring an option for my writing journey. A friend did it. She started typing on WhatsApp, sending to a friend, typing on WhatsApp, sending to a friend. That was how she wanted to create a story. Can we start looking at those? If those means, since we are used to type, my phone is my best, I don't know, my closest companion anyway. So is it possible we use smartphones and all of those for our writing journey, rather than waiting for when I'll be able to sit with my laptop, or when I'll be able to sit and write in a book?
Well, the concept of writing over the years has metamorphosed from the world didn't stop using writing on stone because there was no stone during the Stone Age. It's just because technology keeps moving. And if you insist on writing on your laptop because that is what defines writing, then you would not move on. Now, phone gives you the medium to write. In my recent work, I talk about the transmedium. medium, for instance, there are people who write and post Facebook. Now, you agree with me that this series has moved from a different platform to another platform. You understand? And if you look at former ANA president post, Danger Abdullahi, there was this writing he did, a collaborative writing with somebody in a particular state that corresponds through Facebook messages. Now, in 2015 or thereabout, Arietta did something on Facebook, which is called Join Me Write a Poem. Each poem is written with about 10 to 15 persons online in writing a single poem. They contribute 5 lines to each poem. Now, in 2017, I collected the works of Paikedi on social media. And if you agree with me, that work is up to 1,500 works, 500 pages across social media, on Facebook, on Instagram, on blogs, and all that. I collected it because I found out that he's a great critic and a great writer, but he's scared of documenting his work in this conventional concept called books. Do you understand? In fact, most materials I use to experiment in recent times in terms of book reviews are what I have done over the years on my Facebook page. I take it down, rework them, and refresh them. So the phone and the social media page gives you power. Most studies I have done in terms of social media autobiographies, I study people who suffer from certain diseases and complications and who uses their Facebook page as therapeutic escape from this physical world. So I look at how they respond to ailments, to science. Over the years, you find out that their page is a rich resource and it can pass for a book. And I've seen people in Europe converting most posts on their Facebook page into a book. You understand? So technology bridges the gap of our definition of what a book is. At present, what we should be worried about is our concept of ideas. Is the ideas on social media on a particular page consistent, or is such content not consistent? There are people who are consistent in terms of scooping out knowledge, to the extent that our definition of parent and parenting has shifted, in the sense that today, if I want to cook afang or draw soup or white soup or stew, I can learn that on YouTube. So I no longer rely on my parents to teach me how to cook. There are many YouTube videos that defines this. And such persons have somehow customized those pages to make money from them. So social media page or pages, empowers the writer to document those knowledge that are fleeting, that are ephemeral, that can go, but they can document it on that page and refresh it or reinterrogate it in the years ahead. My recent story, Onion Cells, that would soon be out, was written on Facebook. So over the years, over 5 years or 7 years, I took them down, reworked them and all that. So if you look at them, it's very wonderful. On a normal day, I wouldn't have had the time to do it. But going through them over the years, I asked Facebook to send me all my data on Facebook. They did. Then I selected from that and produced from it. So you have to be conscious. Now, previously, I worked for foreign organizations that gives grants and scholarship for people to go abroad. Now, for them to accept your application for grant or scholarship, first, we'll look at the consistency of your page. How long have you been consistent with what you profess? Do you post food when your skill is education? Do you post fashion when your skill is food? So your page must be consistent with what you are telling the world that you are selling. And such consistency is done over the years. That is why if you want to travel abroad, for instance, like America, you have to include your social media handle. Your social media handle, psychologists, sometimes robots, psychoanalyze if you're capable of terrorism or you're capable of certain things. So sometimes what you do on your social media handle normally blacklist you from leaving this country. So you have to be conscious on that page. On that page, creativity goes on that page. And on that page too, you can write your books on social media, and you can get you can actually get followers on that page. You understand? Although there are intellectual thefts on that page, but what you have to understand is that everything you post on social media has been indexed by Google. Even it's taken down, Google tells you the link is not available or it has been taken down, but it is noted that it has been indexed already. You understand? So you don't need to be in your home to be creative. Most persons, the things they call book and compose were the things they posted on social media platforms that when they were on transit. So your ability to organize those things and to be conscious posting, redefining your handles, also define you as a brand. The social media handles is an extension of an individual brand. So we should start looking at it that way. And we should also start looking at it as a platform of ideas, an extension of creation of books. People think I write much. Not that I write much, but most things I write on social media, I'm actually taking down sometimes, and I rework them to carry the temperament of what I am seeing. You understand? So the technology has given us a lot, and the earlier we understand how this thing functions, the better for us. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm very grateful. Thank you, Mr. Kachi. Thank you. This is very helpful. I find this helpful for me, and I believe to participants as well. You also find this helpful. I remember I shared a post, was that around 4 weeks ago, about digital footprints. The fact that whatever we do online, they leave traces, and these traces, they are trackable. In fact, whatever thing we do on our phones, all the things we do on our phone, the calls we make and everything, they are trackable. So, and for someone who has a vision of being, exploring more opportunities, we need to be very careful about whatever footprints we are leaving behind. Whatever footprints we are leaving behind must not be what will speak against our future exploits. And I'm happy that Mr. Kachi is explaining the fact that our social media handles, all the things we do, they are very important, and they are very important. Thank you so much. I'll go back to Mr. Adekola. I'll go back to Mr. Adekola. You have shared with us you have shared with us an experience of how you told the pupils to look around them and create lines of poetry around what they see, and they were able to come up with fantastic lines. And I think this also align with what Mr. Kachi said earlier, the fact that we should allow the children to tell their own stories. We shouldn't box them into our own ideas, because one thing about creativity is that it deals with one's reality. I remember when we were talking about realities during my master's class. I can't write about what I don't know. Okay, I can't write about experiences I've not had. I'll rather, whatever thing I'm writing, I'm saying, or whatever, they must have been from my past experiences, either the conscious ones or the unconscious ones. So, Mr. Adekola, please share with us, apart from the children looking around them, putting voices to what they have, um, poetry these days have gone beyond the paper. Can we talk about poetry performance? How can we have poetry performances in classes? Short ones that can be helpful to, lessons generally, literacy lessons and some other classes.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, of course, poetry performance, like you said, poetry is beyond mere writing. It has related to performance. Okay, and that of course can be traced to um, um, along the story line. So beyond the modern time. poetry has always been a thing of performance. Like if you talk about even our cultural, sometimes we do in our traditions. For instance, talking about Yoruba now. Talk about Ijala that answers to that's poetry. Talk about proverbs. Some scholars call it poetry and prophecy. Talk about riddles, Allah, Akpari, Allah, Akwamo. And I believe, of course, things like these are in other languages too, other cultures too. So all these things are poetry. They are all poetries. So all poems. So they more often than not they involve performances. They involve performance. So poetry and performance cannot be divorced. They are two things that go pari passu. So while we have in modern times we have written poetry, like we write poetry. For instance, now there are some that call themselves page poets, and then there are those that call themselves performance poets. And again, there are those who are both page poets and performance poets. The ones who call themselves page poets are the ones who what they do is simply write. They don't engage in performance. They don't go on stage. But those that call themselves performance poets or spoken word poets, like we have the influx of that in recent times. So they go on stage. And of course, yes, we can have it in relation to literacy. We can have it in classes. We can have students doing. We can have students um, engaging in these. Okay, and um, like for instance, like what we did the other day, like what the experience I shared that I told them to look around them. I told them to look around them and write something. Yeah, I didn't tell them to perform or to read out their poems, but um, of course that is possible too. And one importance that brings in is that it aids their retention, their ability um, to retain uh, come on, to retain things whatever they learn. Okay, now it won't just be a matter of cramming. Performers, stage performers, they do not cram. I must say this, they don't cram. If I'm going to perform a piece now, not that I'm going to cram my lines, I just master my lines so that it becomes a part of me. And in fact, it becomes me, I become the piece itself. So when I do the performance, I am not going to just begin reading what I've crammed. No, I render what is I've already put within me, what I've already made to become myself. Okay, so in that case, what we have is mastering of your lines, such that they become a part of you. And when you render it, even if it's possible that what you are going to perform on stage, it will be different from what you've written, but the lines may not be the same verbatim, which means you didn't cram it. You must
Yeah.
have only you must have only mastered what you want to say and how you want to say it. So
Oh,
what it does is that it helps students to retain it helps their retaining ability and and that helps in their formal education too, because when they read they are not they shift from the um the temptation to want to cram what they've been taught. Instead, they try to understand and they try to make it a part of them. Okay. I think
okay.
you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Adekola. Thank you for that. The fact that personally I like poetry performance, and I like it more when it is my first language, that is Yoruba. I like it more when it is Ewi, when it is Ijala, when it is Oriki. Oh my God! I remembered I once performed Ijala that was in my 200 level, and I still can't forget those lines. Just as you have said, it is not about cramming. It is about mastering the lines. When you enjoy the lines, you definitely master them. So I want to let me your part. Okay. To Mr. Adejonwo, your parting words. You know, we've run 5 minutes past your session, this session. So let's have parting words from you, Mr. Mike Adejonwo. And Mr. Mike, I have a guess that you're at a shoot with this. Yeah, the shoot. This looks like it. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I was on set. That's why I told you earlier. I was glad it's in the evening. We don't have breaks in my line of work every day. So but it's cool.
Your last words for your conclusion for us, your parting words for educators, parents, school leaders on this call. What do you have? Well, so we can call this a wrap.
Okay. Well, my parting words will be, well, generally to everybody, educators. I mean, educationists, as the case is. Uh, we should always remember the goal of learning is not examination. It's actually impartation. So uh, I think we should pay more attention to what people are actually learning, what is going to be beneficial knowledge that will actually be beneficial for them, not just because this was what we were taught 20 years ago, but because we think this knowledge, this is how it's going to be beneficial. We should all know how knowledge will be beneficial to the students.
Okay.
And we should also understand it is beyond passing examinations. So we should not
Thank,
prioritize passing examinations over knowledge. Thank you.
thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Adekola. Your parting words.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah. I just like to say that um, I would want to urge that that in the well, maybe if it's not formally included um, in the education in the syllabus or in the curricular activities, we can always have this creative means of expression as extracurricular activities in schools, because like I and the others have said, these things have a whole lot um, of importance and a way by which they aid understanding and learning. So it would be good if we have these things maybe as a form of clubs that won't die. I must say that won't die, because
Okay.
I know of schools that have clubs like this, but usually these clubs only they just die and they don't function again. So these
Okay.
things are important. So we should
Okay.
just try to bring them in. Thank you
Oh,
very
thank
much.
you. Thank you. So we're picking clubs from you. Thank you. Mr. Kachi, your parting words. Our speaker for the next session is already waiting, but let's have your parting words.
Okay. Well, basically, we should understand the reality of our students because times are changing and technology is making an impact in how we relate with our world. So we should put our kids to that extent and try to teach them to be critical in terms of deciphering which is genuine and which is not. And this will enable us to protect them even on the cyberspace. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's my great pleasure to have you all at this panel session, the second panel session. Thank you. We've learned
Thank
from you